Welcome to today's live webcast titled Business Licensing 101 Compliance Fundamentals for Providers of Durable Medical Equipment. It is now my pleasure to hand it over to Hans Hawk, Manager of Content Management. Welcome, Hans.
Thanks, Aisha. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Business Licensing 101, Compliance Fundamentals for Providers of Durable Medical Equipment. I'm Hans Hauk. I am Manager of Content Management, like Aisha said, for the Business Licensing Wing of Wolters Kluwer CT Corporation. I appreciate everyone joining today. In this webinar, I'm going to cover the absolute fundamentals of durable medical equipment licensing and regulation, from defining what durable medical equipment is, exploring how it's regulated and by whom, the application and licensing process, and some potential pitfalls and complexities. As the title suggests, it is a 101 webinar designed to give you a bird's eye view of the regulatory environment surrounding the industry, but I think even established medical equipment suppliers will benefit from the information here. So I'll start out by saying that the durable medical equipment industry is one of the most influx industries out there. At CT Corporation, we publish a quarterly digest of industry developments in the pharma industry, which includes medical equipment. And it seems like every few months, states are passing new legislation, either creating or changing DME regulations. And especially with COVID giving rise to questions about PPE, personal protective equipment like masks and at-home tests, there's a lot going on in the world of medical equipment right now that we don't want to let slip through the cracks. So one thing I hope to do in this webinar is to shine a light on some of the shadowy areas of compliance that DME businesses fall into, help you brainstorm or at least figure out what you don't know so that you can feel at ease in an industry that can be anything but easy. Just one point of business. As I'm presenting, if you have a question, feel free to enter it into the Q&A box on your screen there. I'll try to answer some at the end of the presentation if we have time. Otherwise, I'll try to follow up in the coming days. So with that said, if everybody's ready, we can get started. So a natural first order of business is defining the product. So what is durable medical equipment? Well, it's generally defined as medical equipment that is durable. Big surprise there, right? By durable, we mean that it can withstand repeated use, and it's not a drug or a device that is single-use disposable. It's generally used for a medical reason, which is sort of obvious. We're not talking about landscaping equipment, we're talking about medical devices. It's not usually useful to someone who isn't sick or injured, so sort of akin to the last one. It generally has a medical use, and that use is generally to alleviate some sort of injury or sickness. It can theoretically be used in your home, so it can be operated within the home and doesn't necessarily require the systemic infrastructure or constant professional supervision of a hospital or clinic. And it generally has an expected lifespan of at least 3 years. So again, durable, not immediately disposable. Now, it's important to note that these are the parameters of the definition given by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So if you're billing Medicare for durable medical equipment supply services, these are some of the parameters they are going to look at to determine whether the product you're billing them for is what they consider DME. But states and other regulators who actually license durable medical equipment providers might have variances on this definition within their own codes and statutes. So unfortunately, for licensing purposes, we don't have one overarching definition of DME that we can use, but instead we must check with each state and governing body to see if the product we are supplying meets their definition of a product requiring licensure. Now, some states might be extremely general with their definition of DME, while others might actually have a codified list of specific product types for which they require a license. And to make things even more complex, some states may require licensure for medical equipment possessing a specific federal classification like Class 2 medical devices rather than just durable medical equipment. And there can be all kinds of overlap between DME devices and whatever federal class of medical device the state regulates. And so really all this is to say that you should treat every state as a separate problem to solve. Okay, let's take a little quiz. I know it's early, but based on the Medicare.gov definition parameters that we saw on the last slide, which one of these items would not be considered durable medical equipment? So I'll let you all have 30, 45 seconds or so to ring in here. Okay, getting some responses in. Give me about 15 more seconds here. Okay, so yeah, if you said disposable syringes, you're right. Remember, durable medical equipment is designed to withstand multiple uses. So disposable syringes are the only item here that doesn't fit that bill. Now, one more time, I'll say that you never really know what a state or governing body is going to exempt or include in their definition of DME. Disposable syringes might seem like a no-brainer for not being DME, but it's always possible that Oregon or some state passed a bill in late 2021 amending their statutes to include disposable syringes in their definition of DME. I've seen crazier things. So again, it's essential to check the code of every jurisdiction that issues a license to be sure you're operating legally wherever you're doing business. So let's take a look at how DME suppliers are regulated. And we can start at the federal level. Federally, there are some hoops to jump through for any business, really, obtaining a federal employer ID number if you have employees, things like that. But let's keep it to the industry in question, DME. So if you're a manufacturer of medical devices generally, and this includes durable medical equipment specifically, you're going to need to register your establishment, and more than likely the individual products themselves with the Food and Drug Administration. So the FDA keeps tabs on medical devices by monitoring their point of origin and every stop along the way in which the product might be altered or augmented. So pretty much anywhere where the product can either be created or changed is a point where the FDA will keep tabs and require registration. So obviously manufacturers are going to need to register. Same goes for initial distributors. These are businesses who import medical devices for distribution. Contract sterilizers, which are businesses that provide sterilization service for another establishment's devices. Repackagers and relabelers, you're changing the packaging or relabeling the packaging of a device, you're going to need to register your establishment. And also remanufacturers. Typically, if you're just a wholesale distributor of medical devices that isn't a manufacturer or importer, you probably don't need to register federally. But there are always exceptions. So I hesitate to always say you don't need to register. Always check in. But let's move on to the state level, because states are the major regulators of durable medical equipment suppliers. And the state licensing process is going to be the real focus of this presentation. A majority of states do require licenses for businesses that sell durable medical equipment at wholesale or direct to consumer. Now, these licenses might be specific to durable medical equipment, or sometimes it's called home medical equipment. Some states call it that. Or there might be a more general overarching license type, like a mail order pharmacy license or a wholesale drug distributor license that could be required depending on your activity and the specifics of the product. And then finally, we have the local level. Now, typically localities like cities and counties are mainly concerned with general basic business licenses to operate. And their main criteria for whether or not a license is needed is simply, are you doing business here? Or do you have a physical presence here? And if so, you need our license. But it's still important to double check to make sure there isn't a more specific license requirement, even at the local level for your business. Nevada is an example of a state wherein a lot of city and county licenses must be set up specific to a business type before the actual state industry license can be obtained. So again, there are always exceptions. So now that we've explored the various levels of government that might issue a license, let's talk about some considerations for determining what type of license you'll need. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to pretty much zero in on state level licenses from here on out, as these are the real regulators of the durable medical equipment industry. So some things you'll need to nail down in order to determine the state licenses you'll need. First off, is my product DME? Obviously. That is, based on the laws of the state I'm planning to operate in, does my product meet the definition of durable medical or home medical equipment? And if not, is there a different license that is required for my specific product? Next, is my product required to be dispensed per a prescription from a health professional? So some states require licensure for businesses supplying legend devices. And that's a term, it's devices that are required to be dispensed upon prescription or professional order. Sometimes those are called legend devices, but not for businesses only supplying non-prescription devices. So, some states might require it for prescription devices, but not for non-prescription. Some states might require it for all. Next one there's pretty basic. Am I going to be operating from within the state where I'm dispensing the product, or from outside the state and simply shipping into it from an out-of-state location? This will determine what type of license requirements you need to fulfill in order to operate. Also, there are a few states that require you to have some sort of physical presence within or near their borders in order to obtain their required license. So something to keep in mind there. Next is a big one. Am I supplying my product at wholesale to healthcare facilities and professionals, or retail direct to consumer, or both? A different license might be needed for each scenario depending on who you're supplying to. And then an obvious one down there. Does this state regulate my business activity specifically? So Maryland is an example of a state that requires a license to supply home medical equipment, but only if the supplier is personally delivering and or setting up the equipment, with some exceptions. So we want to make sure the specific activity we're engaging in requires a license. And then I mentioned this before, but is there a more general license type that I'm required to obtain? So just because this state doesn't have a DME license doesn't mean I don't need a license whatsoever. I might need a license that on the surface doesn't even sound appropriate, like a wholesale drug distributor license, but which maybe has a subcategory specific to medical equipment sales. And as a quick aside here, I just wanted to give you some names of licenses that various states use so that you can see some of the range here. So some states like Florida, Illinois, Alabama, Tennessee, they'll issue home medical equipment provider licenses, South Carolina issues a medical gases legend devices permit. So again, harping back to legend devices like we spoke about earlier. Pennsylvania requires a very wordy registration under the Drug Device and Cosmetic Act registration. New Hampshire, Montana, Iowa, Wisconsin, they all require various forms of wholesale drug distributor or pharmacy licenses. And for that Maryland license we mentioned earlier, the one that's only required if you're personally delivering and or installing the equipment, that's called a residential services agency license. So that doesn't even sound like medical equipment, but in fact, it is. So be thorough in your analysis of license requirements in every state. Look under every rock. And then finally, down there, we need to consider which board issues my license. So in some states, it might be the Board of Pharmacy. In others, it might be the Department of Health. Some may simply license through the Secretary of State's office. So we need to know who we need to go to get the license. Now, it's important to nail down an answer to every one of these questions ahead of time so that you'll be ready to apply for whichever type of license is required by the state in which you're planning to do business. So here are a few other considerations to make when determining whether a license is needed and which license. So you might say, well, I'm already a licensed mail order pharmacy or a wholesale drug distributor. Do I need another license to ship DME? Well, in some cases, yes, you do need a separate license specific to durable medical equipment. In other cases, there are codified exemptions to licensure for facilities that hold other licenses. Kansas, for instance, specifically exempts licensed pharmacies from DME license requirements, but it does require that the pharmacy license reflects the fact that the licensee deals with DME. So if you already have that Kansas mail order pharmacy license and you begin shipping DME, you might not need a separate DME license, but you might still need to update your current license accordingly. So something to consider. Next, you also might want to consider the physical presence that you have in a particular state. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, there are a few states that won't issue a DME license unless the supplier has some physical presence within or near their borders, but also just to manage expectations during licensing and annual reporting. Places like warehouses, I shouldn't say places, structures like warehouses, distribution centers, and even just offices where records are kept might need to be inspected during the application process. So just something to keep in mind, what's my physical footprint? Next up, do I plan to bill via Medicaid or Medicare? So many patients will utilize one of those insurers to pay for their product, and some states like Colorado literally tie their definition of what a durable medical equipment supplier is to whether or not that entity bills Medicare, Medicaid, or participates in a competitive bidding program in the state. And finally, is my business accredited with a recognized accreditation firm? So for certain products, some states might require accreditation with the ACHC. That's the Accreditation Commission for Healthcare. But for other states, accreditation might just prompt an easier and more streamlined licensing process. So maybe they'll waive the inspection requirement if you're accredited. So again, these are all just things to consider prior to applying for a DME license. So let's say we've identified the license we need and we're ready to apply. Here are some expectations for the application process itself, from some necessary prerequisites to submitting the application and all the supporting documentation to some potential post-application obligations. So licensing boards are usually pretty forthcoming these days regarding prerequisites for license applications. Most boards will have a list of steps or a checklist PDF that you can download from their website. Sometimes the steps will be included right on the application form itself. But here are some pretty common prerequisites that boards might require of a business before it even submits its application. First, a lot of states require that you register with the Secretary of State's office before applying for a license. So this entails forming your business, obviously, if this is your domestic state, or if it's not your home state, registering with the Secretary of State as a foreign entity requesting approval to do business. So this is sometimes called foreign qualification, and not all, but some states do require this. You may need to register for state taxes, so payroll tax if you have employees living or working in the state, sales tax, which DME products, DME products are often exempt from sales tax, but many states will still require that you register for a tax account regardless. And there may be also some corporate income tax, other sort of corporate taxes you might need to register for at the state level. And there might be a prerequisite. Then you have state Medicaid or Medicare registration. So many states have their own healthcare platform where you'll need to register as a provider or supplier or whatever it may be if you want to do business with consumers using that insurer for payment. Okay, so we've satisfied the necessary prerequisites and it's time to submit our application and all that goes with it. Now this is obviously going to include the license application form itself. And these might be anywhere from 2 pages long to 20 pages long, depending on the state. Next, if this is not your home state, most states will require proof that you are licensed or exempt from licensure in your home state. So this might require providing a copy of that home state license, or also a letter or statutory citation of exemption from the home state. Next, you may need to show financial statements that evidence that you are financially stable and solvent. And different states have different parameters here as well. Some might even require a surety bond to be obtained and on file. Next, you might need to show proof of liability insurance or types of insurance that satisfy state requirements. Some states require background checks and fingerprinting for owners and officers. And of course, the appropriate application fee or license fee. And for DME, these can be anywhere from $100 to over $100, over $1,000 or more. And then once your application is submitted, there might be some additional steps you need to take before the license can be finally issued. So for instance, many states require an inspection of the facility, like I mentioned earlier, or a proof of inspection from the home state or wherever the physical headquarters is actually located. And sometimes it might not. It might even be just a self-inspection where you conduct the inspection of your facility, you snap some photos, and you send the report back to the issuing board. And then finally, there might be some back and forth between you and the licensing board in which they request additional or clarifying information or documents before they ultimately approve your application. So important to note, some of these are interchangeable. So where one state might require an inspection as a prerequisite rather than a post-application procedure, it's just different with every state, as you'll find as a theme here. So let's say we jump through all the hoops. We've had our application approved and our license issued, and we're up and running. We should be aware of the long term in order to maintain an active, compliant business. So an obvious consideration is renewal. When will my licenses renew? Most DME licenses renew annually or biennially, so every 2 years, on a specific date. Sometimes the end of the year, December 31st, sometimes simply a year to the day your license was first issued. So make sure you're aware of when each of your licenses renews, as well as what is expected during renewal, whether it involves simply paying a renewal fee, submitting a renewal form, undergoing an inspection, or whatever it may be. Know what renewal entails so that you can plan ahead, start the renewal process early, and avoid any lapse in licensure. Another consideration is changes in your business, many of which will need to be reported to the licensing board within a certain window of time. So think about, since our license was issued or our last renewal, did our business change its name? Did we change owners or merge with another entity? Did any principal officers leave or come on board? Did we move the location of our headquarters or update our mailing address or contact information? Did we begin selling a new product that we didn't list on our initial license application? All of these are changes that boards may require notifications for, sometimes immediately or within a specific time frame before or after they occur, or else during renewal. For major changes like ownership or physical change of location, boards may even require you to close your old license and apply for a brand new one. So knowing what each board considers worthy of a change notification or filing and how to submit it is essential in maintaining a current and compliant business. And then finally, we want to make sure we have our ear to the ground with regard to changes in legislation or rules and regulations affecting our licenses. Like I said in the beginning, states are always passing new bills that change all sorts of regulatory requirements. And one example, the West Virginia Board of Pharmacy just recently switched from annual to biennial renewals for a slew of health and drug-related facility license types. So it's important that we stay abreast of the changing regulatory environment so that we can roll with any sort of legislative punches. Some good resources for staying on top of developments are billtrack50.com. That's one I use a lot, which allows you to search by keyword for any bills passed in previous sessions. So you can search medical equipment or what have you. Another good resource is state licensing board websites and newsletters. Oftentimes they'll have a news section or an updates section of things they've passed recently. The NABP, which is the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy, is another one. The NABP compiles pharmaceutical industry news, which sometimes includes DME. Remember, I said it's not always the Board of Pharmacy that issues the DME license, but it is one resource. Or hiring a third-party compliance firm like CT Corporation to make sure you're always covered for legal shifts that might affect your business. As I mentioned earlier, we put out a quarterly digest of legislative changes occurring in the pharma industry that includes DME licensing matters. It's called TRAC, T-R-A-C. So again, another great resource there. Okay, one more pop quiz for you. For which of these changes might a licensing board require a notification or change filing? Go ahead, and I'll give you 30, 45 seconds here. Yeah, it looks like most folks are going with all the above here. And that's correct. It is all the above. These are all changes for which licensing boards can and do require notification or change filings. So again, depending on the specific state and the nature of the change itself, this might be something as simple as sending an email to the board saying, hey, we've updated our officers, here's the new list, or something as complicated as actually closing your license and applying for an entirely new one. And just to get on a soapbox for a second, I've harped on this in previous webinars, but it's absolutely essential that you build some sort of system of protocol for managing these sorts of regulatory obligations. Unfortunately, the complexity of industries like this one, it just doesn't lend itself to scrabbling dates down on a desk calendar. So whether you have an internal project management software or an individual or team devoted to compliance, or whether you outsource your license management to CT Corporation, you need a system so that you don't fall prey to some of the negative situations we're going to go into next. So we're going to wrap up our overview today just by going over some of the potential consequences of not operating in compliance with licensing laws and rules. So starting at 1 o'clock there in the red, fines and other civil penalties are the most common form of punishment for noncompliance. So licensing boards will frequently issue compounding fines and penalty fees or late renewals for late renewals or missed notifications. Moving clockwise, a freeze on business can occur if a board determines that your business is operating in a non-compliant manner. And this can be even costlier in lost revenue than a flat penalty fee. And it might not even be a board-imposed penalty that brings things to a halt. I've seen business operations freeze and acquisition closing dates significantly delayed because the change of ownership filings weren't submitted in a timely enough manner. So it may not be a penalty in that case, but it's still a ramification of not being aware of compliance requirements for timely submission of filings. Moving on there, revocation of your license is one of the harsher penalties that boards reserve the right to impose. And I don't really need to explain how this can have a negative impact on your business. Publication of disciplinary action. So you may think you can just pay a fine and make the embarrassing disciplinary action go away. And sometimes that's true, but often, especially in industries like pharma and medical equipment, boards actually publish disciplinary measures they took against professionals or firms in their quarterly newsletters or on their websites. So, don't expect it to be a completely quiet affair. In fact, most boards require that you report to them any sanctions or penalties you incur in other jurisdictions, either right away or during renewal time. And if you fail to do so, it can be more penalties from the board you failed to notify. So, don't get caught in that sort of cycle. And then finally up there, your brand can suffer from these kind of penalties. The saying, any publicity is good publicity, is not something they say in the medical equipment industry. So be thorough, stay knowledgeable of regulations, and keep up to date on the laws affecting your industry so that you can avoid the mess of penalties from states who really have no reason to go easy on you. Okay, that felt like a whirl, but we've reached the end of the presentation, and I want to thank everyone for attending the webinar. Again, this is not an intricate deep dive into what's a pretty nuanced industry, but more of a roadmap for starting or maintaining a legal, clean, and compliant durable medical equipment business. We are pretty much at time, and I see we've received some questions in the Q&A box. In the coming days, I'll do my best to respond to each and every one of them, but for now, I'll just say thank you for joining. Please hang tight real quick. There are a few polling questions here for reading the webinar, and thank you so much for joining. I'll turn it back over to Aisha.
Thank you, Hans. And as he mentioned, we just have a few polling questions before we conclude today's webinar. The first question is, would you like to speak with a CT expert about our business license services? I'll give everyone about 30 seconds to answer. Okay, and the next polling question is, evaluation question, sorry. Please rate the value of today's webinar content on a scale from 1 to 5, where 5 is the highest and 1 is the lowest. And our next evaluation question. Please rate today's presenter on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 is the highest and 1 is the lowest. And our last evaluation question. Please rate today's written materials on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 is the highest and 1 is the lowest. Thank you for joining. This concludes today's webcast.